Welcome back in, everyone. This is Chris Landry with Big 12 football and beyond. I welcome you back as we talked a little Pac 12 football at the top of the noon central hour. We're going to spend a few minutes talking a little Big 12 football. Is we're going to take you around the league. Going to tell you what's up with Dave Aranda, someone that looks more and more like he's going to have options. Will he stay at Baylor? Will he move on? We've got the latest on that. We're going to get into that. We're going to dig details into the Texas program and kind of take you back to what started all this and what are some of the issues going on that continue to go on with that Texas program and why it's a little bit deeper and a little bit more challenging. Where is TCU in their coaching search? We're going to have that as well. We're going to recap the week that was, and we're going to start it off by talking about where things shape up in the Big 12 and what are the playoff possibilities for the schools in the Big 12 with the highest ranked team now being Oklahoma State at 9. What does it all mean? We're going to get to it all for you here on Big 12 football and beyond. A reminder, if you're listening to this podcast, we appreciate you. We invite you to join us in the chat room. Go to LandryFootball.com, click on follow Chris on Twitch, or if you're so inclined, go to Facebook, Landry Football, or YouTube channel, Landry Football, and join us there. Join us in the chat room. Ask your questions, comments. We'll get to them there. It doesn't have to be about Big 12. It can be football, college football, NFL. We'll address it for you. If you would go to LandryFootball.com and click on Big 12 Football and Beyond. Click on it. Sign up for Big 12 Football and Beyond. It tells us whether you like this, whether you like what we're doing with these conference shows, is we're going to have to make some decisions on. We're going to maybe rebrand some things or at least kind of get things packaged a little bit differently at the end of the football season. But we like your feedback on it. So appreciate you joining us. All the Big 12 games from this past weekend, as well as all the other games from around college football, have been broken down, analyzed, studied for you at LandryFootball.com so you can get all the latest there. Also, we remind you that we're going to have all the look-aheads to next week's games in the film room preview sections over at LandryFootball.com. So take advantage of the football season sale and get on top of it. Not only the game breakdowns, but you want to get all our draft information, all our recruiting information, all the coaching search information, all the details behind the scenes. We got it all for you at LandryFootball.com. So take advantage of it today. I got great message from our folks at the Daily Tip that we'll get to in a little bit. But we're going to start a little with the playoff rankings. As we mentioned, you've got Oklahoma State at 9. You got Baylor at 11. You got Oklahoma at 13. Out of conference, but Houston at 24. So what does it really mean? It really means that Oklahoma State with one loss, Oklahoma with one loss, certainly not look good, and losing to Baylor hurts. Don't know if they can win out. If they do, Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, winning this weekend and then winning in Bedlam and then winning the conference championship game, it would look like Oklahoma State has the best chance to move up. How much would they move up with a win against Texas Tech? Maybe not a whole lot. How much would they move up against Oklahoma? Oklahoma's a ranked team. They're 13. Certainly not as highly ranked as maybe people thought they might be at the beginning of the year until you started to watch Oklahoma play, and they were not nearly as effective. You'll wonder how much juice will Oklahoma State get. So let's go through some scenarios here, and we're going to get into this a little bit more on the Landry Football Podcast at 5 p.m. Central today, where we're going to break down all the coaching rumors and searches, and we're going to get into the college playoff rankings. But in my view, should Ohio State win out, and I do like their chances of beating Michigan State this week, and Michigan State this week, and Michigan, next week. I think that takes care of the Big Ten. There is not a second team from the Big Ten that is a candidate. I think the ACC is out of it. Now, you look at it and say, whoa, 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 Chris, Wake Forest has got Clemson this week. Clemson is not Clemson, but if they win out, that's a one. I think Wake Forest has got a glass ceiling. I think the ACC's out. I think Ohio State will be the only one from the Big Ten. I think, as I've mentioned on the Pac-12 show and the other college shows, that I don't think Oregon's going to beat Utah twice. If that's the case, that's a two-loss team. I think that would knock the Pac-12 out. So if the Pac-12 is out and the ACC's out, I think Oklahoma State, a one-loss Oklahoma State Big 12 champion, a one-loss Notre Dame, a unbeaten Cincinnati, that's 3, would be vying for 2 spots. Georgia, Ohio State, and one of those 3 would be vying for 2 spots. Or would they be a 4th? Could a 2-loss Alabama team that closely loses to Georgia in the conference championship game, would that 2-loss team, with the only team that's come maybe close to challenging Georgia, would that be enough? Would it be enough to be ahead of Cincinnati unbeaten? Maybe not. Wouldn't have to be. Would that be enough to be ahead of Oklahoma State, a one-loss conference champion, or Notre Dame, a one-loss? I think they would be ahead of Notre Dame. I don't know about a one-loss Oklahoma State. But as I mentioned, not an easy path for Oklahoma State. What if Oklahoma State loses a second game? You start doing the math, it's going to be hard to find 4 teams. You're going to start bringing 2-loss teams into the conversation, whether you like it or not. There's not going to be maybe one-loss team in Notre Dame, maybe an unbeaten Cincinnati. That's where people are looking at it. I don't know that an Alabama team that plays Georgia close, and it looks close, and it looks like, whoa, this is the 2 best teams in the country, and I know they lost to Texas A&M, and I know they lose this one, but come on. I think that Alabama team would have a real shot. Now, that's the scenario, though. If Alabama looks like they have looked, it won't be close. And therefore, a 2-loss Alabama that gets handled by Georgia would have no shot. They would put somebody else in. That's kind of how I see it. But I don't know at this stage, would Oklahoma, if they were to win, and I know it's hard to look at Oklahoma and think that they're going to win out, but if they do, would they get the same consideration as Oklahoma State? Because right now, Oklahoma State looks like the better team. But if Oklahoma beats them, how far would they move up? Interesting. I think that Oklahoma State's ahead of Wake Forest. I think Oklahoma would move ahead of Wake, and I think Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, one-loss Big 12 champion, would move ahead of Notre Dame, and I think it would be they and Cincinnati. But you're dealing with a couple of scenarios. Oklahoma State could lose. Oklahoma could lose another one. Cincinnati could lose. Heck, Alabama could lose. Oregon could lose. Everybody would be talking about 2-loss teams. I don't think Notre Dame is going to lose. It's going to be interesting. A lot of football left. We'll get to it a little bit more on the Landry Football Podcast at 5 today. I want to get into the latest in the Texas situation. It's getting ugly, isn't it? I mean, we know we had the whole goofy monkey situation with assistant Coach Jeff Banks and his significant other. We had the Bo Davis blow up after the game against Iowa State, which was, in my view, deserved on how he played. But one of the things that came out of it, one of the things that has come out of the Texas camp is that, well, yeah, we get the whole everybody needs to be focused and everybody needs to take it serious and everybody needs to be disciplined as players. Well, what the hell is that with Jeff Banks and the monkey situation? And that shows, hey, you're not even having your coaching staff in a very disciplined situation. That becomes a bigger issue, and there's obviously the conversation taking place that as many as 35 players on the roster could be changed over. Tough to do. Better have the patience that Texas heretofore has not shown with any coach if they're going to make that much of a turnover. Now, we've never had the transfer portal at its current peak to do that, but boy, you better hit a lot of guys right. And you better kill it in recruiting, and you can sign, your 30, 33 and great shirt and put together transfer portal, but man, that is a crapshoot. You better show signs of improving the culture. Look, one of the things that we talked about with Texas and Sark, is Sark the type of guy that could fix the culture? Does he have the strong hand to do that? Is that his personality? It's not about calling offensive plays. It's not about calling ball plays. It's not even about just, well, let's find a playmaker and let's fix the quarterback spot. That is short-sighted, and that's putting a Band-Aid over a big gaping wound that is the University of Texas football program. You have got to figure out the core of the problem, which is the culture of softness, the culture of entitlement that has taken place since the latter stages of Mac Brown, that led to the next steps, and it has not been corrected. It reeks of, well, you better have a disciplinarian coach that can fix it. And I don't know if Sark is that guy. I do not think he's going anywhere this year, of course, but they've lost 5 games in a row, and not a more embarrassing loss than the one to Kansas, favored by more than 30 points. Got a lot of issues there. I don't know if Sark can do it, but one thing that they need to do if they have to move on in a couple of years, and as we've seen with Jimmy Lake in Washington, 13 games into his tenure. Do we think that if this continues next year, that Sark's going to survive next year? I think we know the answer to that based upon their history. There's going to need to be marked improvements in terms of the culture and the attitude, the consistency. The thing they've got to do, that they've done a poor job of, they need to get a disciplinarian guy that can fix it. If nothing else, somebody comes in and cleans out the crap, instills discipline, and begins to recruit and change the culture. Even if they're not good enough, if they can at least get it on the right track, then, and you get the train moving, albeit slowly, you can at least have a chance. But right now, it's more about the train's off the track. How the hell we get it on the track? Do we even know where the track is? Those are the things that are problematic right now. And it's not an easy fix. It's maybe the toughest fix. You can go out and have a good recruiting class. You can go out and coach some ball plays. You can put guys in a position to win. But if you don't have a culture, if you don't have a discipline, if you don't take what you're doing seriously, if you don't have accountability, Look, this team was 4-1 and leading a significant lead against Oklahoma at 4-1, and it looked like, whoa, this looked different. It was all a house of cards. Yes, they were doing a good job putting guys in a position to make plays, but can you rely upon the character, the culture, the discipline, the mental toughness of that team to sustain it? Whether you know the answer is no. Definitively no. So how does that change? It's going to have to be a cultural change that Sark has to figure out, or they're going to have to get somebody in that's a disciplinarian. Don't bring a guy in ever again in this current environment and say, let's find somebody that can fix our offense or fix our defense. Bring in a disciplinary guy, a disciplinarian that is going to change the culture. Look, that's what they were trying to do when they tried to hire Saban a few years ago. Couldn't get it done, but that was the plan. It does look like, as I mentioned, that Oklahoma State's the only playoff worthy looking team this year. They demolished TCU on Saturday night, and they look like the only team that's capable of doing any damage in the playoffs if they were to make it. I do think this is the first time I've said this team looks better than Oklahoma. And in Stillwater, I think it is their time. I think it's their year. I think they take care of business against Tech. And I think they beat Oklahoma. Again, what do they have to do? Do they play Baylor? Do they play Oklahoma again in the Big 12 championship game? Can they do that? Can they get that done? It's one of the two. And I think it could be, for the good of the league, maybe it's going to be a rematch as all these teams play one another and you don't have divisions. Maybe a Oklahoma State Baylor rematch is the best looking game. Unless we see otherwise, this Oklahoma situation looks a little bleak in terms of on the field. More on Lincoln Riley in a second. Look, I fully support Dave Aranda kicking a field goal. It is not his job for whatever reason. He did it, and it tells you how detailed oriented Dave is in his understanding of the tiebreakers and point differential and all of that. You may not like that rule, and in fact, I don't like it. But to get additional points when you have tie among two lost teams in the Big 12 title race, points differential is the third tiebreaker. That's smart. I thought Lincoln Riley came off petty, came off like a baby. He came off like a whiny little bitch, to be honest with you. Keep your mouth shut. You don't like that he did it. You wouldn't do it. I've seen you run up the score when there was no reason to run up the score. You did it. So to get some extra points in a legitimate way, just shut the hell up and coach your football team. I just think it was, bad. So that was bad sportsmanship, not what Dave Aranda did. So, if you look at unnecessary garbage touchdowns against Kansas in the final seconds. He scored 14 points in the fourth quarter against Western Carolina when they were up 62-0. And if you're Oklahoma or Texas and your university is just months removed from taking memberships from the SEC, you just got to suck it up and eat it. You look like a whiny little bitch. Kansas, what a impressive performance. I love it for Lance Leipold. I love it for those Kansas kids that have worked so hard. It is an ugly, ugly loss for Texas, but it's something they can build upon. That you've got to at least acknowledge. Iowa State, boy, it shows you where you can be and playing the favorite dog. And Matt Campbell's done a really good job there. But in the year where it looks like you had the best team, you have just come out flat this year. And this loss is a 10-point favorite to a Texas Tech team that can't find their way. They fell to 6-4, 4-3 in Big 12 play. And, I know they may have been overvalued as a top 10 team, but they weren't far off from that. They were definitely top 20. And I think Matt's done a really good job, but this hasn't been a really good year. Game balls to Devin Neal, the freshman running back of Kansas. Terrell Bernard, the Baylor linebackers, played such a really good game. And Donovan Smith, the Texas Tech quarterback, the freshman, really, really good. Going through the power rankings before I get into more talk around the league, particularly as it relates to coaches. Got to go with TCU at the bottom. It's in a bad way. I'm going to give the hold off a little bit as they've got the Kansas game. It's TCU, it's Kansas, but I want to take Kansas out of the bottom this week. But look, they were able to get the upset over Baylor. Kudos for them, but an even bigger upset for Kansas beating Texas. I think if this week, I think TCU's got a better chance of beating Kansas. So I think Kansas is going to be 10, but I think putting both of those teams down at the bottom is where they belong. Then I'd put Texas right there at 8. Not a team in the league has had a rougher stretch. They started 4-1. They've dropped 5 straight. The last 2 weeks, they were blown out by Iowa State. Gave Kansas his first Big 12 win of the season. Really, really bad for them. B. John Robinson's out for the year. They're going to West Virginia this week, and it could get worse. Put West Virginia a little bit ahead of them. Looks like West Virginia was turning things around. They're 4-6. They're 2-5. They won 2 straight, knocked off Iowa State, and were 4-4 the last 2 weeks. They lost to Oklahoma by 21 and Kansas State by 17. They were regressing back to what they've been. Texas Tech getting blown up Oklahoma and having a bye week. Nobody had their Tech on the radar coming in the last weekend, but they took down Iowa State thanks to an impressive 62-yard field goal at the end. Next game against Oklahoma State. Again, an Oklahoma State team that's playing well. Still put Iowa State at 6-4, 4-3, kind of in that 5th range. Put Kansas State a little bit ahead of them. Most confusing team, no question about it. They took down Oklahoma State and Texas in a stretch where they won 4 or 5. So you saw they beat the team that may end up winning the league, but they're bowl eligible, but a big letdown. They got Oklahoma this week, and could put the death nail for Oklahoma's any chances they might have for the Big 12 title this week, and dilute the Bedlam game next week. Kansas State 0-3 start to beginning Big 12 play, but they have improved themselves, solidified stealth. They won 4 straight. The last 3 wins have been by 17 or more. Baylor, I'd put at 3. They just had a bad week against TCU. After losing, they took down Oklahoma by 13 points to really shake things up. I'd probably put them ahead of Oklahoma. Still, but Oklahoma's just got 1 loss, haven't proven himself up. And then I'd put Oklahoma is really doing a good job, and again, ready to kind of take that next step. As relates to Baylor and Dave Aranda, it's looking tougher and tougher, like they're going to be able to keep him in the fold. He is very high on Washington's list, and he may be the favorite for the USC job at this point. Nothing's definite, but in his organization, his attention to detail, his leadership, I think his intelligence to be able to be on the cutting edge of everything that's going on offensively, defensively, recruiting, I think he's really good. A lot of people have criticized his recruiting prowess. He's very good at identifying and evaluating players. He's also someone who works hard at it. He's not the gregarious personality, but he's very impressive in a room in talking with recruits and kids. I think he's a better recruiter than one might think. And I think he'd be a better head coach recruiter because I think he'd put together a really good staff, and I think he's someone that could, he would do a very good hands-on job of evaluating and making tough decisions on recruiting that need to be made on who's a fit, who's not a fit, and he could really coach the coaches. He'd really help an offensive coach out a lot by really breaking down what gives defenses trouble. So I think he would really put some good things in place for an offensive coach, but understand the importance, if you're going to win championships, that you have to play complementary ball from an offensive and defensive standpoint, which simply means that you've got to be able to allow your defense to be successful. And he was obviously would be great at doing that. And I think all you need to do is look at the job that he did in 2019 as a defensive coordinator at LSU, where people will talk and criticized the LSU defense. Well, that defense was never going to be great being on the field as much as it was because of an explosive offense. But they played good situational defense at pivotal moments when they had to. They didn't do it consistently, but they did it when they had to. And let me remind you that it was the offense that definitely led the way. It carried the water for LSU's championship game team in 2019. But that defense, again, aided with a lead, you know, buoyed by the offense, their defense had the right mixture on against Clemson and Oklahoma, two pretty good offenses. So I think he'd be a great fit at USC. I think he'd be a great fit at Washington. I don't think that LSU hasn't worked the Dave Aranda situation as well as I would have if I were them. I think Dave Aranda is really, really good, and I think he's got a outstanding shot. At TCU, it's Sonny Dykes' job to turn down. Is my understanding. Um, I do think that if for some reason that doesn't work out, and I tend to think that it will, and I think that's why it's kind of quiet. I think that's basically a wink in a nod. I think Jay Norvell of Nevada is a candidate, and I think Billy Napier is at least in the mix, at least trying to leverage maybe a situation and maybe leverage the possibility for someone as Billy, I think, would probably be more interested in the Virginia Tech job. But this kind of gives him a little bit of leverage. His agent, Jimmy Sexton, is certainly putting that out there. I do think that TCU would have some interest in Billy as a backup, but clearly it's Sonny Dykes' job to turn down. One thing I will say, with regard to any other openings inside the league at this point. Um, I don't see anything happening anywhere else at this point outside of Lincoln Riley. I want to address that. And I'm going to address that a little bit in the Landry Football Podcast. I knew I was drawing a blank. I wanted to address something. So the situation with Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma is this. All things relatively equal, he wants to stay at Oklahoma and will stay at Oklahoma. He is certainly trying to leverage the situation to get more money and to get more for his staff and more years on his deal at Oklahoma and the right type of contract with the right type of setup. There is a buyout currently in his deal. I think he'd like to get the buyout removed so that it just is a clear path for him if he ever wants to leave and go somewhere like the NFL, which is not going to hinder an NFL team from wanting to hire him. But you want to get the best contract you possibly can, and I think that's what he's doing. I think he's leveraging the LSU job to get an even better situation at Oklahoma. If Oklahoma makes a deal that's in the ballpark, in the range that what LSU is willing to offer, he will stay at Oklahoma. Um, I am confident in, resourcing that. I think that's the case. Now, what if they don't? What if everybody has their stopping point, right? What if they say, no, this is where we're going to go? Then that would create the only scenario where I could see him leaving. We'll get to that since I think it is less likely to happen. We'll get to that when and if something were to develop there. Folks, with no questions in the chat room today, that'll take us through at least the major portion. We're going to get into a little bit of the games this weekend in just a second, right after I tell you about my good friends at the Daily Tip. If you're into sports betting, you know just how quickly the lines can change. And when you've got a lot riding on those odds, it pays to stay ahead of the curve. So before placing your bets, listen to the Daily Tip presented by BetMGM for the best betting analysis and information. They are fun, they are informative, they are extremely helpful. A lot can change between last night's games and today's odds. The Daily Tip gives you an early look at all the angles. Hosts Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messinger break down the big takeaways and make sure you know everything you need to bet smarter. With featured guests like bookmakers, Odyssey insiders, and BetMGM experts, you've always got a fresh take on the action. Your friends will be wondering what you know that they don't. Not that you have to tell them where you heard it. As much fun as it is to bet on games, it's even more fun when you've got the inside scoop. Ready to bet with an edge? Tune in to the Daily Tip presented by BetMGM. Listen weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern on Odyssey, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. So this week, again, recapping what we've got Baylor at Baylor at Kansas State, Iowa State at Oklahoma, Kansas at TCU. You got Oklahoma hosting Iowa State, as I mentioned. Oklahoma State at Texas Tech. Mentioned Kansas at TCU, and then Texas at West Virginia. And then that is it. So we'll have all those detailed breakdowns over at LandryFootball.com, as well as all the other conference breakdowns by conference. We may have a Baylor, Kansas State, and Oklahoma, Texas Tech breakdown for you, and maybe even Iowa State, Oklahoma. So check that out over at LandryFootball.com. We'll have it all for you there. We'll break down all the games, all the teams, all the inside information, college, NFL. We got it all for you at LandryFootball.com. Hey, appreciate you joining us. Join us at 5 p.m. Central Time as we break down everything in the world of football, college football, NFL. We're going to go over all of these coaching searches. We're going to go all over the coaching playoff brackets. We're going to go through the conference races, look around the NFL. What's it looking like as we're heading towards Thanksgiving week? What things are looking like, how the teams are looking inside the film room. Got a lot for you, so bring your questions inside the chat room. Join us on YouTube, Landry Football, Facebook, Landry Football, or twitch.tv at Chris Landry Football. We appreciate you joining us. Join us again next time for another edition of Big 12 Football and Beyond. Sign up for it. Go to LandryFootball.com, click on the Big 12, listen to the podcast again, and sign up for it. Appreciate you joining us. Talk to you then.